Kia ora, this is Trevor Shailer. I'm the CEO of Sport Manawatu in Palmerston North, New Zealand. If you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Dennis Giannoutzis.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutzis.
Hey, welcome to the show, Leadership is Changing. What we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Leaders everywhere confront similar obstacles because people are people, but everywhere we go, leaders are overwhelmed, disrupted, and under pressure. They run from email to email, meeting to meeting. Many leaders are not changing quick enough, which means they run the risk of becoming irrelevant and being left behind. The purpose of the show is taking our listeners' leadership to another level by finding their balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. I believe we don't have enough effective leaders in the world today, and if we can get those leaders to step up and lead change, then it can inspire real change. It is now time to adapt in a fast-moving world. Hey, listeners, thanks for joining me on today's show. So our guest today is Trevor Shailer. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Sports Manawatu, a regional sports trust providing services and events benefiting the sport and active recreation interests of Palmerston North City, Manawatu, and other regions within New Zealand. As a sportsman, Trevor has won 13 national boxing titles, represented New Zealand at the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, and won bronze medal at the 1994 Commonwealth Games in Canada. Trevor's also been involved in 9 Olympic Commonwealth Game campaigns with a focus on athlete support and games time. He was the Deputy Chef de Mission for New Zealand team in the 2014 Glasgow Commonwealth Games and 2016 Rio Olympics. Trevor's also worked in the social change and health promotion, working on several national advertising campaigns. And he's been, working around things around breast and cervical screening, sexual health problem, gambling and mental health. In 2012, Trevor became a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for a contribution to sports and the community. And I had the great pleasure of actually being there in his after party to enjoy the celebration of him actually receiving that award. He is a life member of the New Zealand Olympic Order and was recently awarded an Honorary Associate by the Universal College of Learning, UCOL. In September 2019, Trevor completed his master's degree with distinction from the University of Belgium. Now, his research looked at the influence of Māori culture on the New Zealand Olympic and Commonwealth Games team's experience. So it's just a great pleasure to have Trevor here. Trevor, welcome to the show today.
Oh, kia ora. Hi, Dennis. How are you? Great to be here.
Great to have you here too. Hey, so I've given a brief background on you. Is there anything else you might want to add a little bit about your background?
I think, it's always interesting listening to your profile being read, you think, oh, geez, trying to reflect on all of those moments, because when I do reflect on it, it's quite interesting to think about all of the range of activities you end up getting involved with. In terms of a little bit more information about my background, obviously Palmerston North is where I grew up. Both my mum and dad we're pretty keen on a family, and we ended up with 5 boys. So I've got four brothers. We adopted another brother and 2 sisters. So we end up with quite a big family. So, but Wow. There's a 6.5-year gap between my oldest brother and my youngest brother. So You can imagine with a 6.5-year gap, not a lot of gap between us. And so we, grew up in a pretty robust environment. Boxing and fighting was always top of the pops at our house. And and that was, sport played a really big part in our upbringing. And I was lucky enough to get involved with boxing, so which took me on a whole different pathway. Which really is really, when I think about the discussion today around leadership is changing, that's a good starting point, is to understand where it started from. And for me, sport was really that avenue that kicked things into play for me around leading and being in part of a wider group, even though boxing was an individual sport.
Yeah, cool. And sounds like it was really exciting times, with siblings and that, and growing up together with them. Hey, for you, how did you get into leadership?
Oh, it's a really good question, Dennis. I was taking some notes earlier, and I'm thinking, how did I get into leadership? And the honest truth is, I fell into it. And when I look back on my career, and in my office, I've got one of my photos. And when I was 12 years of age, I was the captain of the rep team for Manawatu for softball. I was actually the national champion of in boxing as well, but in the softball team, that was the first time that I was in a leadership role in terms of being the captain of the team. And I suppose ever since then, I've kind of always had this level of expectation from others around me kind of taking a lead role. And again, like I said, I don't think it doesn't feel like I ran towards it, but it was something that was in front of me quite frequently. So, I kind of, and when I think about my other parts of my career, when I moved into the health sector, being a young Māori male in public health in New Zealand was quite novel. So,
right.
It was mainly women that did the health promotion type work rather than men. And again, so it thrust me into, again, a leadership role because of the uniqueness of me being in that sector. But because I was boxing and obviously training to go to the Olympics, I spent a lot of time being contacted by schools. Schools would ring me and say, "Oh, Trevor, can you come in and talk to our students about goal setting? And you're off to the Olympics, and what's that like?" And I really took advantage of that opportunity and went and talked to schools. And I developed a lot of skills during those sessions around storytelling and connection and self-awareness and developing my emotional intelligence to try and read the audience. And I think that was a real big grounding for me, was being thrust in front of, groups of people to tell stories and to talk and try and string everything together to try and get to a point to inspire a group of young people that I was in front of. So that's, it's a really cool thing to reflect on in terms of, how far I've come, but also how far there is still to go.
Yeah, great. And also influencing so many people as well, because, I'd love to see what their stories are now as a result of actually hearing somebody like yourself in the past as well, which would be pretty interesting to hear. Hey, Trevor, who's your favourite leader? Now, this question here it could be someone who's alive or from history. So who's your favourite leader and why?
It's a pretty big question because, again, I think it's hard to pinpoint any one individual. Mm-hmm. I think of over the years when I think about, leaders and mentors and people that have come in and out of my life who I've been able to learn something from or take something from, it has been quite vast. And I've been fortunate, when I think about, when the student's ready, the teacher turns up. And I've been fortunate that a number of teachers who are leaders have turned up in my life. But the person that I'm going to talk about is a guy by the name of Amster Reedy. Amster passed away a few years ago now in 2012. So what's that, 8 years? His full name is New Amsterdam Reedy. And he was named after a merchant sea carrier that took the Māori battalion to the war. And he was the eldest child of 18. And 18 children. He was the eldest of 18.
Wow.
And he became my mentor, and I really looked up to him as a leader. He was an amazing man, both in terms of his cultural knowledge and the depth of his cultural knowledge, but also the way in which he was able to connect through his humility. He was inspiring, but he did so much for me and created so many really, really good opportunities for me. And he was the one that said to me one day, he was correcting me. I'd made a mistake with something, and he corrected me, and I felt really embarrassed, that I was being corrected. And he said to me, because he could see that I felt a bit of shame and a bit of embarrassment, and he said to me, the way to think about it is, I'm correcting you because I want the best for you. I want you to be better. And ever since then, I've been far more comfortable with getting things wrong. I've been far more comfortable with, people providing feedback or providing input in terms of how I could do things differently or better, and I haven't. So that hasn't been a block or a barrier for me. So, Amster he was an incredible individual. I mean, I could tell you stories for days, Dennis. We travelled together overseas. We did some amazing work in the cultural space with the New Zealand Olympic team and different organisations that he and I both worked for, because we ended up joining up together and working quite closely on a range of projects that were about health and well-being. But when I would be sitting in the room from a cultural perspective, and there'll be a cultural piece or a welcome to our process. And Amster's was amazing in terms of his level of cultural knowledge and understanding of all the rituals and so forth. And he would kick me under the table. I'm not sure if that's very leadership-like, but he'd kick me under the table and go, hey, he'd look at me and I'd look at him, and the kick under the table was, that he wasn't going to stand up. He was kicking me to say, hey, can you reply? And again, there was that challenge around going, oh, okay, it's my turn. He wants, and again, when I think about it, he was creating more opportunities for me to stand and show what I was capable of, but with his support and with him as a safety net to make sure that he was there to catch me if I needed it. And to me, that was amazing.
Yeah, tremendous. Yeah, so been giving you the opportunities to challenge you to get out there and do something different, but also go and do something, but knowing that safety net is there, which is great to have him there as a supporter. Fantastic. Trevor, the show here is called Leadership is Changing. And when I say that terminology, well, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I think your introduction, put the, puts the finger on the pulse really around, that notion that change is constant. And I think I think that's the important part. And I think we have to adapt and evolve. And that's what it means for me when you say leadership is changing. That means that we've got to continue to learn, to adapt, to change, to think about our context, I think the challenge for a leader is to be able to navigate your way through those complexities, to try and boil it down into some simple actions often. I mean, it's, you can run towards it, or you could choose to be a bit more reactive on it. I suppose I'm not sure I'm sprinting towards it, but I would like to think that I'm moving towards the fact that I'm okay with the fact that it's changing. Because if you realise that that's the norm, then that will allow you to be able to see and take different types of opportunities, I think.
Yeah, at least if you could acknowledge it and know that it is actually happening, and then you can do something about it, that's for sure. And I like what you're saying about that, navigating your way through the complexity to make it simple. And I think for a lot of us as humans, as leaders, and that we make things way too complicated. And if we can simplify it, that's great for us, but also for our organisations and our teams as well. Mm. Hey, how's your business or industry changed, and what impact has that had on you or your team?
Well, certainly over the last little period with the global pandemic, it's created a significant amount of change for our sector. The sector that I work in is play, active recreation and sport. So it's had a significant impact on on sport in terms of the structure of sport and the competitive nature of sport. But in all honesty, Dennis, the sport anyway was already under challenge. Like more and more young people are dropping out of, organised sport. They don't compete like maybe you and I used to growing up. And it's a natural part of the New Zealand fabric. We're a sporting nation, and then all of a sudden we've got a lot less young people that are participating in organised sport. So that's really, it highlighted the fact that we've got this significant gap that's been created with young people opting out of the out of sport or being active. And so I think that for us is the challenge. What does that look like in terms of leadership, and what does that mean for our organisation? I think for us it's been helpful because, that as there's a famous saying, I'm not sure who by, but, you never waste a good crisis. So the opportunity to look at how you might work differently and what you might do in terms of providing different types of ways of thinking about the problem, I think has been really exciting.
Yeah.
But in saying that, in a leadership sense, it's easier said than done. Everybody likes the idea of doing differently or change, but there's a question there around, we're not necessarily wired for it. We like doing the same. We like keep doing the same stuff. We're not necessarily that good sometimes at thinking differently, even though we might think we like to. I'm not so sure sometimes. So I think there's been from a leadership point of view, it's been a real challenge and a period with the staff and the organisation to bring them on the journey around being okay to fail, creating the environment that allows them to explore different ideas and sharing different ideas with the team around how to think differently or how to be curious, how do you challenge yourself. So all of those things can't just be done by one individual. I think you've got to create the environment that allows people to be engaged in the conversation, because a lot of, in terms of not what's changing, but I think, people want to know that they've been heard.
Yep.
And I think listening, I think we might not say it enough, but I think listening and hearing aren't always the same things, but I think they're an important part of the mix when you're dealing with complex issues, but also dealing with a range of diversity in the way in which people think and act in your organisation.
Yeah, amazing. I'm here with Trevor Shailer. He's just sharing listeners the fact that we are not wired for change. We don't like change. We want change to happen, but we don't always like it ourselves or when it happens to us. And the other thing too is that people want to know that they're being heard. Some really great insights here. If there was one thing, and I'm sure there might be several things, Trevor, but if there was one thing that you could change in business as a leader today, what would that one thing be?
It's a great question. I mean, for me, I think I would like to change the idea that I'd like to change the idea that leadership comes in different forms. And I think we've got to be able to celebrate the fact that sometimes we can have a perception of what that should look like. And I think that we need to be okay with the fact that leadership comes in different forms. And in Māori culture in New Zealand, there's a proverb that I use quite frequently, which is te amorangi ki mua ko te hāpai o ki muri, which talks about, it works well, if it works well at the back, it'll work well in the front. And that whole notion around, that there are leaders in the front and there's leaders at the back, and that all of us have a role to play. And I think sometimes maybe that in leadership we can maybe get carried away and think that, the ones at the top, make all the decisions and so forth. But I'm probably of the view that leadership comes in many different forms. And I think if our leaders today can create more opportunities to hear different voices, to provide those opportunities like AMSA did to me and for me, that's what I'd like to see more of, rather than the notion that, leadership's not based on the fact that I have a CEO title. It's really important that I still keep checking that people are willing to follow what I'm trying to do. And I think that's a good reality test every now and then, just to check that people are following your lead and that you are doing those role model things. Because if people aren't following, then you're just out for a walk.
Exactly. So you're just out for a walk if no one else is following you. Absolutely. And I think I like what you said about the fact that we celebrate that. And if we can celebrate the different types of leadership and the different flavors that come through, that's a wonderful thing. And being able to do that. But you're so right. If you're not checking in on a regular basis to make sure that you as a leader are doing the right things or doing things that are, that's wonderful. So many times there is that stereotype that the person is a leader. Now, as you said, it could be because of the title, and the title doesn't mean that you're a leader. It's just a title. And I've seen so many times where you've had a managing director or a CEO, and you look and you go, there's no respect there. There's no connection with the team. It's just missing, which is really quite scary indeed. Hey, Trevor, with employees today, how has employees' expectations of leaders changed?
Yeah, I'd like to think certainly in my sector and in the organisation like the organisation that I'm in, which is a not-for-profit organisation, that the gap, the leaders aren't right up the top and everybody down the bottom. The gap between the two is a lot closer. So I think the expectations have changed around the fact that employees and team members can be a lot more direct and a lot more open around their views. And again, I think that can be it can be challenging for some people. I'll tell you a little story, Dennis. I was going through some challenging contract negotiations, really important stuff, and I was finding myself being quite negative towards the negotiation part, and the impact of my negativity had a flow-on effect for those around me. And one of my leadership team meetings, one of my staff members said to me, he said, you've been really negative towards the particular contract, and said, I wonder if we need to be more grateful. And then the honesty was appreciated. Full stop. It made me stop and take the time to reflect on my behaviour and on kind of my messaging. And it's funny when things happen. And just so happened, a friend of mine sent me some information out of the blue, which always tends to happen for me. And it was above and below the line. It's about the foundational piece to do with self-awareness. Foundational framework. And again, so I just picked up that tool and had a look at it and sat down with my leadership team and said, right, okay, here we go. Here's this tool. I'd like us to have a go at using it. And when I drop below the line, I want you to be able to ask the question. And so being able to be challenged and being vulnerable is important, but the impact that it's had on our group has been significant in that we're able to start our meetings, not by getting into the work, but stopping and starting with, how are you showing up today? What space are you in? How are you? Are you ready for, are you frustrated? Are you excited? Are you curious? And I think a 5-minute discussion has such a big impact on the rest of the meeting. And it's also had a major impact on how we've developed a stronger connection with my team and the rest of the staff. So it's a tool that we're regularly using. So it's really that challenge, Dennis, to not be afraid to continuously improve, and that it's okay to keep looking for and open to receiving knowledge and ideas and feedback. It's what you do with it is the key.
Yep. Okay, cool. So it's great to be vulnerable and having that feedback and understanding and so forth. But once you get the feedback, once you get the learning, it's what you do with it is what counts, is what Trevor's saying, which is very, very strong indeed. So maybe that's a bit of an answer to the next question, maybe not, but what makes a leader successful in this fast-paced, ever-changing world?
Yeah, I mean, success is really it's a really big question around, how do you determine success? What does success look like in your organization, in your business? Is it revenue? Is it turnover? Is it, customer feedback? What are a collection of all of those things? So I think having a view or some clarity around what success looks like, I think, is an important starting point. Certainly for me, you could say in that last story that I told around being vulnerable, to me, that's success in some ways for me, because it says to me that my environment that we've created collectively enables my staff to be open and honest about how I'm leading, what I'm doing. So, I mean, to me, this might be a bit simplistic or a bit basic, but to me, that says that we're on a pathway to success if we can continue to have that type of space and environment that allows that discussion. Because if we're all focused on continuous improvement, knowing that you've got to keep asking the right questions, you've got to listen, you've got to provide the feedback, and you've got to have the level of accountability to mean what I say and say what I mean. And I think you got to find some things to hold yourself to around what's important. So I think you got to determine what success looks like. But I think in that fast-paced changing, I think it's the degree of flexibility and your own responsiveness to the change. How quickly are you able to adjust, to adapt, and to change to the environment, to be able to, what I say to the staff when they're out, delivering work or on the ground, I say to them, what did you see? What did you see when you were out there? What did you observe? And then I go,
yep.
When they provide the feedback, I go, great. So what are we doing about what we see? How do you take that and actually then do something with it that is meaningful, that's responsive? And I think that's what I think the challenge is with the fast-paced world, how we change, how we respond to the change. And you know what? You might not get it right. And you know what? That's okay too. And, what have you learnt? The thing, you can't throw the towel in a boxing term. You can't throw the towel in. You would never throw the towel in. You just learn from it. You pick yourself up and you got to keep moving. You move forward. Ask those questions again and you adjust. Yeah, I think it's a constant. Constant is the constant word around here.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. And I like what you said too, is about how quickly you're able to adapt. And I think with the pandemic that we've had and so forth, a lot of organisations will be left behind. So will a lot of leaders, because they haven't been able to adapt and move quickly, where others who have are just taking off. Their businesses are doing really well and so forth. And so I really like what you just said there as well. Very good. So, Trevor, if I was to get you to get your crystal ball out and start thinking about the future and so forth, and where do you see leadership being in 5 years from now?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting time and period for us around, what that's going to look like. I hope what we will experience and see in years to come, in 5 years, that that our leadership approach around development and support will enable that grassroots for all of us to see that we all have a role to play, that leadership isn't just about being at the top, that leadership, I heard somebody say, I like the saying, they go, for most complex issues, when you're trying to come up with solutions, they go, look, there's no silver bullet. And then he said, no, there is. And I went, oh, is there? He said, yep, the silver bullet is leadership. And I think, well, it is, and it is. And I think I believe that to be true, that the silver bullet is not so much the detail of the question, the issue, but it is leadership. It is about how we bring others on the journey, how we respond to challenges. There's insights and you can analyze all sorts of stuff, and you've still got to make decisions and all those good things. But I would like to think that we've moved away from thinking that leadership is top down. That's what I would hope in 5 years' time, that it might be a bit flatter, or that there's more people up the hill. More collaborative. I think, again, if you think about that proverb I said, that leadership comes in many forms. So I think we shouldn't get too caught up in thinking that there's only one way. I think there's multiple ways to get there. And I think we've just got to make sure that we're checking the way in which we're going, and if we check the signposts, and are we taking time to reflect on those around us? I think it's some challenging times ahead in terms of what's happening globally in the world around how people look at leaders or look to leaders. The best thing we can do is look at leadership of self.
Yep. Very good. And Trevor, I like what you said before about the grassroots leadership side of things. Now, if you go back to one of the very first things you said in the show, which was around the question of how did you get into leadership, it was more or less you fell into it by accident. And I think that we have a lot of people in countries and the world and so forth who are coming through the ranks or through their different ages groups and so forth at schools, sporting teams, into organisations, and it's really the grassroots, and that's where we should be in there helping develop them so they're getting ready for the future and given the opportunities. And as you said, you've shared with some of your mentors, or one of your mentor in particular, who has helped you a lot and given you some great opportunities, while also being there as a support blanket to be there, or support net, a safety net, as you said, which is really helpful. Excellent. Hey, some great learnings there. Trevor, look, I want to say to you, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. If our listeners are wanting to get hold of you, where should they go?
Oh, thanks, Dennis. It's been great to be on the show. If any of the listeners are keen to connect with me, then LinkedIn's the best place to find me. Just Trevor Shailer, LinkedIn.
Yeah, great. We'll actually have that in the show notes. But Trevor, once again, thank you so much for being on the show. Awesome to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Hey, pleasure. What we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Change is incredibly scary, especially with the unknown and the unfamiliar territory. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing. Look out for the episodes as they've been released. Download them, listen to them, put a review and a rating. Please feel free to share with your network. If there's any feedback you'd like to give me on the show, or a question you'd like me to ask my guests, or if there's a question you want to ask me in the Ask Dennis episode that happens once a week, send me an email, dennis@leadingchangepartners.com. Hey, listeners, don't forget, we've released the Leadership is Changing Facebook group, and feel free to join that. Other than that, team, great to have you here on the show with us today. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.